Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana-salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmaye Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahiyam Tadati Svavadantikam Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Garim Yat Kripa Tamaham Bande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam. Okay, so my obeisances to all of the devotees. On Wednesday, we were talking about service and service attitude and the quality of service, and how a devotee engages in service without motivation, or shall we say the quality of pure devotional service, which is what we aspire for. The highest quality of devotion is one where personal considerations are put aside and one acts for the pleasure of Krishna. And because it's very rare, extremely rare, for a devotee to get an opportunity to render service directly to Krishna, that service is most often manifest in relationship to Krishna's devotees. And so we generally serve under the direction of and for the pleasure of Krishna's representatives, the devotees. So there is a tendency, or there can be a tendency, to see our devotional practice somebody's so material motivations need to be put aside, and we value that in those devotees who are dedicated to rendering service and show great enthusiasm and determination, patience, determination, enthusiasm for serving the devotees in whatever capacity. In ISKCON, we value that, and yet there are sometimes when we see the activities of devotees in somewhat of a material way, material fashion. And I wanted to meditate today on a couple of reflect on a couple of sections of literature, I guess we could say. There's in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, there's a description, Prabhupada excerpts, well, it's actually from the Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 4, texts 18 to 20. And these are about a very wonderful devotee the emperor of the whole universe, practically speaking, and that's Ambarish Maharaj. And this is it's in relation to controlling the senses. So it's being referred to in the perfection of devotional service means that we can automatically engage our mind, our words, and our actions by working in devotional service. And of course, that that's the motive is to please Krishna and to please the devotees, and that's manifest in what we do. And of course, the potency or the power. We may not be very advanced yogis, even not very advanced devotees, but if we just engage in the practice of devotional service, then automatically we can come to a very, very elevated platform, and a platform in which the mind, our words, our actions, what is it? Kamana, manasa, vacha, or gira, right? So these, we by engaging in service, we're automatically controlling the mind, our propensity to speak, and our actions. And that elevates us to a very high platform. So Prabhupada gives this example. The great sage Durvasa Muni picked a quarrel with Maharaj Ambarish. And Durvasa Muni unnecessarily became angry out of pride and therefore could not check his senses. And this is in relationship to, controlling the senses. But it's very interesting. Durvasa Muni was a very, very elevated yogi. He had 30,000 disciples, and so very, very elevated and celebrated yogi. But he got upset. And why did he get upset? Because Ambarish Maharaj was slightly, very, very
morning sort of class. I can skip it. It's just
offensive to Durvasa Muni. And what did he do? He'd taken a vow to follow his Ekadasi Brata, which the full Ekadasi Brata is fasting all day till the next. No, not taking anything. And so, and there's a titi at which point you're supposed to break your fast. So Durvasa Muni was expected as a guest in Ambarish Maharaj's palace, and Ambarish Maharaj was facing a dilemma because he wanted to greet his guests appropriately, but at the same time, he also had to break his fast. And so he wasn't sure what to do. He didn't want to offend Durvasa Muni. So he consulted with his Brahminical advisors, and they came to the conclusion that it would be okay if he just drank some water, because drinking some water would technically break the fast, but technically also wouldn't be seen as, having eaten breakfast before your guest arrived. But anyway, Durvasa Muni became very upset and offended by the fact that Ambarish Maharaj had broken his fast before greeting his guests, which is just, that's just quite humorous when you think about it. And, Durvasa Muni's anger is quite unjustified. Considering, Durvasa Muni then created a demon. I think, was it Durvasa Muni who pulled a hair out of his head and threw it into the ground to create a demon to chastise and punish Ambarish Maharaj? But anyway, as it turns out, the Sudarshan Chakra of Lord Narayan appeared to protect Ambarish Maharaj. So Prabhupada mentions here, on the other hand, the king, although not as powerful a yogi as the sage, but a devotee of the Lord, silently tolerated all the sages' injustices and thereby emerged victorious. So the king, even though he wasn't as advanced a yogi as Durvasa Muni, he was able to control his senses. And how did he do that? And it's mentioned here. Savaimana Krishna Padara Vindayo. So King Ambarish fixed his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, engaging his words in describing the abode of the Lord. So Sankirtan, or Kirtan at least. Now, and here's the one I like. Karo Harer Mandira Majanadishu. He would go to the temple. Karo Harer Mandira. Right? And what would he do when he got there? And keep in mind that Maharaj Ambarish was the emperor of the universe, not just of the planet. But Ambarish Maharaj is even though Prabhupada says here he wasn't as big a yogi as Durvasa Muni, he's still an exceptionally influential and powerful person, right? But look at his activities. He'd go to the temple and he would clean the temple. He would hear the pastimes of the Lord. He would go for darshan, right? What is it? Mukunda Lingalaya Darshane Drisho. He would go to the temple and see the form of the Lord. Next one. Tadbritjagatra Spasenga Sangamam. He would engage his body in touching the body of the devotees. When we see our friends, what do? We embrace them. Although maybe in the COVID times we've refrained from touching others, but ordinarily when we see devotees, what do? We like to embrace them. His nostrils in smelling the flavour of the flowers offered to the lotus feet of the Lord. His tongue in tasting the tulsi leaves. Srimat tulasya rasanam tada pite. His tongue in tasting the tulsi leaves offered to him. Pado harer chetra padanu sarpane. His legs in travelling to the holy place where his temple is situated. That was mentioned previously also. Shiro Hrishikesha Pada Bivandane. Shiro Hrishikesha Pada Bivandane. His head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in fulfilling the desires of the Lord. And all these qualifications made him fit to become a Mat Para devotee, topmost a topmost devotee. Now, it's always struck me that Ambarish Maharaj is obviously a very elevated individual and a very elevated devotee. But yet, if we look at his activities, practically the activities of Maharaj Ambarish, much the same as the activities that we perform in ISKCON. We like to think of we think of Krishna's lotus feet every morning. When we rise early, we go for the arati, the Mongol arati, and we see the form, the murti form. And this is, again, evidenced here by the Bhagavatam, Pado Hare Chetra, Pado Hare Chetra Padanusarpane, right? Traveling to the holy place where Krishna's temple is situated, right? And then seeing the deity, and then absorbing our minds in that darshan of Krishna's lotus feet. And again, 7 o'clock in the morning, we greet the Lord, and again observe his beautiful and beautifully decorated form in the temple, so we can see here that the activities of Maharaj Ambarish are pretty much the same activities. Srila Prabhupada has us engaged in activities the same as Maharaj Ambarish. He's meditating on Krishna. He's talking about the qualities of the residents, the qualities of Vaikuntha and the qualities of the residents of Vaikuntha. He's going to the temple and he's cleaning. The first thing he does, actually, here, Mandira Marjanadishu, goes to the temple and cleans the temple. So, what we see in the example of Ambarish Maharaj is an example that we can embrace and follow in the footsteps of. Sometimes there's a tendency for us to see elements of our service as being perhaps not as elevated or only meant for the neophytes, for those who have an inability to engage in just purely Shravanam, Kirtanam, to keep them enthused and to keep them engaged. We get them to do things like wash the pots or clean the courtyard or even go and sell books. There can be a tendency to look at the activities of the devotees as somehow material, not spiritual. And this is a critical element of having a service attitude. And the service attitude also means appreciating that all of the engagements that we perform in devotional service are purely on the spiritual platform. And Lord Chaitanya prays, na danam na janam na sundarim. So, we don't want any material facility. And another issue in having the right attitude in the performance of our service is to also take advantage of the material facilities that we're given. as a result of the performance of our devotional activities. But I wanted to concentrate, or at least at this point, focus on this point that our activities in devotional service shouldn't be seen as mundane. Now, Prabhupada even gave the example that the devotee cleaning the courtyard is on the same transcendental level as the devotee who's cleaning or worshipping the form of the deity, dressing the deity, offering foodstuffs. So, you know, the proximity is not a measure necessarily of intimacy. And just because the pujari is close to the deity, that means that his service or her service is superior to the devotee who is cleaning the courtyard. And we see that. Karo Hare Mandira Marjanadishu. Amarish Maharaj goes to the temple. What does he do? First of all, he cleans it. And I know when I was given the cleaning services as a young devotee, I thought, oh, why am I burdened with this activity? Mop the floors, put out the rubbish. But we can see in the example here that any activity which has a connection with Krishna, and when performed with the right mentality, with the right mood, as an offering, right? What's that? Is that verse in the 9th chapter? Yat karosi yadashnasi yashtadosi yat. Oh, I've forgotten the verse. But Krishna mentions whatever you do, whatever you give away, whatever offerings you perform should be done. Everything should be done as an offering to Krishna. And in that mood, then the activity shifts from being in the material world to being in the spiritual realm. We may not realize it or appreciate it, but those activities, and you know, this is the wonder, or it's the splendor of, it's the mystical process of bhakti that Srila Prabhupada has given us, which elevates us to a very high platform, even though we don't appreciate it. We may not appreciate the elevation that's been provided for us. Without any qualification, Srila Prabhupada has elevated us to this point of action on the spiritual plane. Srila Prabhupada mentions this in the introduction to the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm going to read something here. This is from the original edition of the 2nd volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada says, the path of fruitive activities, i.e. to say the path of earn money and enjoy life as it is going on generally, appears to have become also our profession, although we have renounced the order of worldly life. Right? So what is Prabhupada referring to here? He goes on, they see that we are moving in the cities, in the government offices, banks and other business places for promoting the publication of Srimad Bhagavatam. They also see that we are moving in the press, paper market, and amongst the bookbinders, also away from our residence at Vrindavan. And thus they conclude, sometimes mistakenly, that we are also doing the same business in the dress of a mendicant. But what's his response? So Prabhupada was being criticised. Prabhupada was being criticised for his apparently material activities. But what's his response? Even though we are not in the Himalayas, even though we talk of business, even though we deal in rupees and paisa, still, simply because we are 100% servants of the Lord and are engaged in the service of broadcasting the message of his glories, certainly we shall transcend and get through the invincible impasse of Maya and reach the effulgent kingdom of God to render him face-to-face eternal service in full bliss and knowledge. We are confident of this factual position, and we may also assure to our numerous readers that they will also achieve the same result simply by hearing the glories of the Lord. Janmana shruti matrena puman bhavati nirmala. So, Srila Prabhupada emphasises here that even if a devotee externally appears to be working much the same as the materialistic workers, engaged in similar activities, what does Prabhupada say here? Moving in the cities, in the government offices, banks and business places. That doesn't mean that he's become a mundane businessman, or that, cleaning the courtyard is just the activities of the sweepers, of the street sweepers. But rather the activities, and especially the activities of preaching for us, are not material activities. That book distribution, for example, sometimes people criticize the devotees. Oh, you're just book distributors, just interested in selling books. Right? You're only interested in collecting money. But actually, these activities are motivated by the deepest compassion for others. And so, whilst there may be a veneer, if you like, of material activity, because we're dealing with money and we're going into the marketplace and we're mingling even with materialistic people, still the motivation for those activities and the motivation for those services is prompted by compassion, deep compassion for those who have lost their way and have forgotten their relationship with Krishna. And this is very critical for the Krishna consciousness movement, because our service and our services are very much entwined with chanting Hare Krishna, certainly for our own benefit, but also chanting Hare Krishna out on the streets for the benefit of others. An extension of that, and that's showing compassion for others, compassion for ourselves, because that's the instruction of our spiritual master, and it's the instruction of Lord Chaitanya. And by extension also, Prabhupada describes book distribution as the Brihat Mridanga, in that the messages of Krishna are then distributed broadly to everyone. And that book distribution especially is an extension of that compassion and an extension of the Sankirtan movement, in that the messages of the Lord, the messages of the Bhagavad Gita, the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam is given to people in the form of a book. And that's a show of compassion. It's not just okay, yes, we go out and sell books to people and we do collect funds, but it's not a material activity. It is a purely spiritual activity meant for the benefit of everyone, for the purification of ourselves and for the purification of others. And if we perform those activities with conviction, those activities in a mood of, Prabhupada says, book distribution is in the mood of the gopis, in the mood of Srimati Radharani, who is engaged in bringing others to Krishna for Krishna's pleasure and also for their benefit. A devotee is not interested in keeping Krishna just for themselves, but rather a devotee is interested in the benefit of connecting everybody to Krishna. That's the purpose of book distribution. It's not a material activity. Even keeping the courtyard clean, keeping the temple in a state of readiness for Krishna's service, or readiness even for greeting guests, bringing people, preparing prasadam for guests that come to the temple. This is all meant to bring people closer to Krishna. And so we need to have that along with as part of an unmotivated attitude. And in order to see what we're doing on the spiritual platform, and that's required, that unmotivated mood of service is required to then gain the vision in which we're able to see then that all of the activities that we perform are purely on the platform of transcendental action. And that those activities are not to be mistaken, even though they look on the external platform, they appear to be the same, they're not. And, that our training and our education, our studying of Srila Prabhupada's books, the chanting of our rounds and so forth, it's ultimate. It's initially at least to save ourselves, but then when we become fixed up devotees, our business is to try to help others, like a lifesaver. When I was in grade 1 in primary school, we used to go for swimming lessons, and you would get your beginner's certificate, which meant you could swim 25 yards. It was yards in those days, not meters, but they say 25 meters of dog paddle, which meant, basically you could just swim 25 yards and save yourself from drowning, practically speaking, but not an accomplished swimmer by any means. And then there were other certificates. There was the intermediate certificate, and then you could also get a bronze certificate and a silver and a gold certificate as a swimmer meant that you could practically then become a lifesaver. So, you know, a beginner's certificate doesn't make you a lifesaver. So we have to protect ourselves and save ourselves first. But when we become fixed up, competent devotees, then our service to Srila Prabhupada and the service to, well, ISKCON's service is to give as many opportunities as we can to others so that they can be brought closer to Krishna and closer to understanding of their relationship with the Lord. So there can be in ISKCON sometimes, or we're criticised by others, that you know, we're engaged in somewhat lower. Well, that's the other. You know, we're engaged in low-class activities because it's not purely Shravanam and Kirtanam. But even though it's not Shravanam and Kirtanam, it's still devotional service to the spiritual master, service to the mission of the previous acharyas, service to Lord Chaitanya's mission, ultimately service to Krishna. And we should appreciate and understand that all of these activities are on the purely spiritual platform, and that ultimately they'll bring us to our relationship with Krishna. And this was something that Srila Prabhupada was dedicated to doing and exemplified, and was his offering to the vision and the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, an offering to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because this was also his, you know, this is the reason why Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would worship the printing press, and in some of his temples, the printing press was right next door to the deity room, and the books were worshipped as the Archa Vigraha of the spoken form of the Vedas. You know, a book containing the same message as, say, as the Bhagavad Gita is non-different from Krishna. And so therefore Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur honoured, worshipped even the printing press. When the printing press was first installed in New York, the ISKCON press, when Prabhupada came into the room, the first thing he did was offered his obeisances to the printing press. Right? So, you know, of course, that doesn't mean that every printing press is sacred, because most printing presses are used to publish, you know, nonsense, books that just glorify materialism effectively. But the printing press that's used to distribute Krishna conscious literature is worshipable, as is the literature itself, because it's the physical manifestation of the spiritual form of Krishna's teachings, of Krishna's words, or the words of the acharyas, the words of the previous incarnations of the Lord, the form of the Vedas, effectively. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, following in the footsteps of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, worshipped the printing press that produced transcendental literature. So there's this, you know, this particular mode of rendering service, even if it is simple or apparently, you know, just a mundane activity like sweeping the floor. or washing the pots. It should not be seen from the material perspective, but should be seen from a purely spiritual, from the pure spiritual platform, and should be engaged in as enthusiastically as hearing and chanting. It's as is evidenced by Ambarish Maharaj, worship of the deities, going to the temple, rendering service. It's all done for the pleasure of the deity, and so it all by extension is deity worship. And we should perceive it and understand it from that perspective. So we should have a positive attitude, or the quality of our worship should be pure, in that it should be not motivated for material benefits or philosophical understanding. And it should be appreciated that those activities are purely on a spiritual platform, that service is done, that service which is done free from material motivation and without consideration of, result. The results are left up to Krishna, is pure devotional service, and that those activities, whatever they might be, are appreciated by pure-hearted devotees as being on the transcendental platform. And that's something that we should embrace, a mood that we should cultivate and embrace, and take pride in our service. And make sure that if the service is meant to be done, should be done, that we're requested to do it, that we do it at the highest possible level of achievement. If it's worth doing, then do it properly, not that we skimp or cut corners, or try to rush through what services we've been given, but that we do them to the utmost of our ability and to the highest standard, lest we see them as purely mundane. We have to be careful not to see the activities of devotional service as being on somehow inferior, or that some services are higher than others, or that some devotees are engaged in lesser services. There's that story of the Brahmana, the illiterate Brahmana, who was told by his spiritual master to read the Bhagavad Gita every day, and which he took on faithfully. Yet he still couldn't read the Bhagavad Gita. But when Lord Chaitanya saw that devotee reading the Bhagavad Gita, he had tears in his eyes. And of course, people made jokes about the illiterate Brahmana reading the Bhagavad Gita, but he couldn't understand the words. Yet he was crying. First of all, he'd embraced the order of his spiritual master with enthusiasm, despite his disqualifications. And he came to a deep realization of the Bhagavad Gita by just looking at the picture of Krishna becoming the servant of his devotee, Arjuna. So, we have to be careful about seeing our devotional activities and the performance of those activities from just the external platform. And we have to value the engagement in any service as having powerful spiritual potency. Of course, we do see sometimes that devotees engage in activities but with a material mentality. But we should be careful not to. We should try to avoid that. And it's not easy because we become familiar. And there's the saying, familiarity breeds contempt. And so we need to be careful about becoming too familiar with our services, not appreciating the spiritual value. And of course, that the ability to do that does depend on our sadhana, how much we engage in the chanting of Hare Krishna and the study of Prabhupada's books, the worship of the deities, so that we become fixed in our spiritual conception of how we work and avoid, seeing our day job, if you like, as a mundane activity, which is very important for householders, especially. So these are some of my thoughts on service attitude and service mood. Does anybody have any comments or questions at this point?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Guruji, for a very nice lecture. So, my point is this: a person is on the material platform, so his consciousness is not so pure. And so here we are talking about the Amrish Maharaj and his attitude, how we should serve. But suppose we are artificially practicing this, so this will how this will help us on some extent, because we are not on that platform. Suppose we are trying, but person will come down again and again. So how one can attain that consciousness?
Well, it'll come automatically. If we approach our services with the right mood and mentality and with a pure heart, then the end result will be that, well, what's the most attractive quality of a devotee, do you think? One of the most attractive qualities of a devotee?
Tolerance.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking about something very simple here.
Follow. Simply follow.
Yes, but what in the character of a devotee, what do we see?
Being humble.
Yeah, humble. But how about just happy?
Yeah.
Susukam kartam avyayam. Right? So if we're chanting Hare Krishna and we're, basically following a standard sadhana program, and we're engaged in services that are suitable to our nature, and of course, in emergencies we'll do anything, but in the routine standard work we do what's natural to us, then we'll become happy, right? And happy because we're identifying with our spiritual identity, not with the material. So this is one of the byproducts of devotional service, is that we become happy and we're not thinking on a material platform anymore. We're fixed in our spiritual identity. This is the real benefit, and we know that, or we see that in the character of a devotee, because they're happy. And when they speak, that realization is understood by how they conduct themselves and by how they speak. So this is the this is how we can tell. This is like our litmus test, a litmus test. And if you know what I mean by a litmus test? Litmus. You know what litmus paper is? Litmus paper is paper that you get in a science lab, and you can touch it onto various liquids, and if by that you can tell what it's what do you call it? I've forgotten what litmus paper is used for. Oh, you can determine the pH, the acidity, or the pH of a liquid. So you use it to test the quality. So our test is to see whether devotees are happy or not. And if you're happy in your service, then you'll be able to see things from the spiritual perspective. And happiness in devotional service means, chanting 16 rounds, following the principles, attending, having a good sadhana program, and doing our service in a detached fashion. And then automatically it will come. Does that make sense, Anarpita Kripamoy Prabhu?
Not so clear to me, Prabhuji. Not so clear to me.
Okay. Repeat the question again for me.
My point is this: person is on the material platform, and the consciousness of the Amrish Maharaj is very high. So, at that consciousness, it is easy to serve Krishna with this mode, but we are not on that platform. So, at least how we can serve to Lord I
would suggest that Ambarish Maharaj is engaging in the same activities as we are. And so, we should understand that the activities we're engaged in are just as elevated and are just as potent to bring us to the spiritual platform. Now, the way that we can get a deep connection to that experience of a devotee like Ambarish Maharaj is primarily through the Pancha Anga Bhakti, right? And through the five primary activities of bhakti that connect us with prema, we engage in those. Prabhupada makes sure that we're engaged in those activities right from the beginning. So what is that? Kirtan, right? Devotees Association, hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, serving the deities,
residing in the dham.
Yeah, and if you're doing all of those activities, then you're in the dham, pretty much. When Prabhupada came to Melbourne, he said on one occasion, "This is not Melbourne, this is Vaikuntha." Oops, hang on, somebody's trying to call me here. If we engage in basically the same things that Ambarish Maharaj was doing, then that means we're on the same spiritual platform, right? It's not complicated. And, when you participate in a kirtan, how do you feel? You feel ecstatic. And that's why we dance and sometimes, call out Haribo. And, we're not on the material platform. We're on the spiritual. We're in the spiritual world. When we worship the deity, we feel the impact of that. When we hear the Srimad Bhagavatam, we're no longer in the material world anymore. We're seeing everything from a spiritual perspective. If we're doing these things with attention, staying awake, I guess that's, one of the first, I guess, critical elements of bhakti is, get up early, but make sure you stay awake. And if you perform these activities with attention, with enthusiasm, determination, patience, then gradually, and actually fairly rapidly, you'll be elevated to that consciousness of realizing you're not the body, right? First thing. And realizing your spiritual identity as a development of this understanding that you're not the body. And that just comes naturally to us. It's gifted to us. So that's why, even though, yes, Ambarish Maharaj is an elevated person, so are we if we follow in his footsteps. And, you know, our realization may not be fully developed, but we should appreciate that we're actually very fortunate to be elevated to that platform where we experience the benefits now, and we'll have a deeper and fuller realization as we keep practicing. Okay?
Thank you so much, Guruji. So can I
You
ask
can do
one
it.
more? Can I ask one more question?
Let's see. Lalita Priti has got a question. Let's go to her. We can come back to you if somebody else is if we run out.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Since you spoke very wonderfully about the devotional service, performing devotional service, we hear in many classes, and even in Nectar of Devotion, we see that devotees should be enthusiastic to perform devotional service. And especially during festivals, we have a lot of services, and we try our maximum to perform the service whatever we can. And each one of us has our own energy limits. And we know if we cross beyond that, we drain our energy and we cannot perform the service for the next day. So does like performing services to the extent we can do it, does this mean that we are still in our comfort situations and not extending beyond that? Or we have to think about the next day also, and we have to just limit ourselves? So how do we take that?
Good question. Yes, both. Yeah, not easy. It's a challenge. But and you know, think of Janmashtami. We get up early. We go for the morning program. We work hard all day. Go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then the next day is Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja, and we have to get up and go to Mangalartik after having, you know, 2 hours of sleep. I remember when my first weekend in the temple was for Janmashtami and Vyasa Puja. And at midnight on the Janmashtami day, the devotee said, "We've got some service for you." And I thought, "Oh, great, got some service." And they said, "We want you to go and clean the kitchen." And I, you know, this is the first time in the temple. I was super excited and very happy to go and clean the kitchen. And then I think I went to bed at like about 2 o'clock. And then 4 o'clock came along, and I woke up enthusiastic for Mangalartik. And I tried to wake up the brahmacharis. Said, "Come on, it's time to go for Mangalartik." And they just rolled over and said, "Oh, go away." So come on, it's Mangalartik, it's, you know, let's go. And of course, you know, I was utsahamai, you know, puffed up with enthusiasm. But yeah, I don't have quite the same enthusiasm that I used to have. So it's a challenge. Yeah, balance. We need to be balanced, but sometimes, you know, we extend ourselves during festivals, and it may be, you know, practical that we get somebody else to do those services. So, you know, for the devotees who do the cleaning up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning if they've got services rostered, say at Mangalarti, it's probably wiser to, get somebody else to do that service if the individuals also, spend a couple of hours after midnight doing cleaning services or just rearranging things, getting things organised, expecting those devotees to get up again after only 2 hours sleep, or even ourselves after a couple of hours of sleep, it's going to be very difficult. And so we need to manage things in such a way so that it's balanced and we appreciate, the capabilities of an individual. Right? We have to make adjustments sometimes. We may not be able to perform at full, capacity 24 hours a day. Part of that time we may need to have a rest. Not may, I mean, most of our experience is you do. And so therefore, we need to understand our practical limitations. When I was 23, when I first came to join the temple. So, when you're very young, you can do stuff like that. And unless you're extremely advanced, completely off the bodily platform, practically speaking, you can't do things like Raghunath Das, just have 6 drops of Charanamrita, every 2 days. It's just not going to work. It's not, so we need to understand our own personal limitations, practically, rather than try to imitate people like Raghunath Das. How does that sound?
Yes, Prabhu, very practical. Thank you so much.
Yeah, be practical. Otherwise we're going to be chastising people. Why aren't you like Raghunath Das? Right? Why aren't you like Srila Prabhupada? You only could run on 2 hours of sleep a night. Okay. Anybody else? Comment or question?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you so much for the wonderful class. Today, I learned that we have to dovetail all the activities towards Krishna to come closer to them. Like how Amrish Maharaj, being a king of the universe, he dovetailed all his activities towards Krishna, which brings closer to him.
Yes, that's right.
And
Yep.
one question I have, I can't appreciate myself. I get up at early in the morning and do my japa by like 3 o'clock. And when this japa session is here in VIHE, that time is my service time to my deities, like deity decoration and plucking flowers. So please guide me. What should I do? Should I skip that and sit for the japa, or should I continue with that and finish and then sit for the japa for myself?
What time do you start your puja?
I do my japa before Mangla Aarti, like 8 rounds, and then I start Mangla Aarti 4:30.
Yeah.
Then after that, I do the deity worship for like 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and the VIHE japa starts at 5:30. So like half an hour, 40 minutes, my services are like plucking flowers, because after the sun rises, I can't pluck flowers, all flowers withers away. So what should I do? Should I omit that service and do japa, or it's just for 2 days? How should I go about it?
Who are you worshipping?
Radha Krishna. Shri Radha Krishna Chandra and Gaunata.
You can't not do your puja to Radha and Krishna. It has to be done according to a particular schedule. And then you put your japa in after, I think. So ideally, but you can come to some part of the japa session, can't you?
Yes, I come. For the some
Yeah,
part,
so,
I'll
I wouldn't. I think, one of the challenges of deity worship is that it's performed usually in the japa time when other devotees are chanting japa, and that's an austerity that the pujaris embrace. It's one of the challenges of being a pujari is that you're actively engaged at a time when everybody else is sitting down or just
for japa.
doing their japa, right? That's
Right.
the austerity of deity worship. And then they have to make time after they've done their puja for their, sadhana, sravanam, kirtanam, right? And so, do the deity worship, greet the deities, go to class. This is in a standard temple setting. And then after that, chant japa. So that's the austerity of being a pujari, is that, the pujari is generally, the pujari service is done at a fixed time. And once you've committed to that, especially if you're worshipping Radha Krishna, you can't really change it. You've got to keep doing it.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you so much. I was little confused. What should I do? I'm missing japa. Prashanta Mataji may say, where is Raslila? She's not chanting, and I'm doing service and plucking class. Though I'm chanting that time also, I'm speaking Hare Krishna Mahamantra only. But I was little inside, ki, what should I do? So I asked you this question. Thank you so much.
Okay. Be practical. But, deity worship does have its commitments. Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
So, do you want me to write a note to Prashanta?
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Prashanta is here. And this question would better have been asked from the VIHE staff, as it concerns the course. But anyway,
I think
you
I
gave
think my
whatever
response is-
answer. It's true, we have to be practical. And
Yeah,
but
just
at
be
the same time, we have integrated these japa sessions in the, in the course. One, to help the devotees, because many of them are alone at home. Many devotees are always like that, congregation devotees, plus in this pandemic period, what they call it. People are alone at home, so we have the japa sessions, and it's also part of the assessment for the course, because the board of exam requires that the sadhana of the devotees has to be checked. So we have a system of sadhana cards, but we also have these sadhana japa sessions, and usually we know that those who attend the japa sessions, usually they are set with their sadhana. It's like testing a grain of rice, If they are able to come twice a week to the japa sessions, we understand that they are having a morning sadhana. And those who don't come, usually we talk to them, we ask them what's the problem. Sometimes it's timings, time zones, this DG worship, some specific service. But in general, we try to come to some understanding that they should attend some part of it, so that we have a proof that they are actually up in the morning and they are chanting. And depending on the seasons also, sometimes we have some special inspirational programs for the japa, which is very beneficial for everyone. Like we read, we're not doing it right now, but sometimes we do that. We are having some readings just before the japa, so that devotees learn how to tune their consciousness while chanting. So it's always very beneficial for devotees to come for japa. Yeah. And there are always a few people who have some difficulty or the other. So
yeah. Anyway, these are details that can be sorted out
Yeah.
between student and teacher.
Yeah.
Yep. Loaded question.
How can I miss the japa?
Or an alternative is to do the puja earlier.
Yeah. Work around it. As we were saying, it's only 2 days a week.
Yeah.
So it's not much. And it's only for 4 months. After that, usually devotees
You can do
move
what you
on
like.
to some other.
I will follow you, Mataji. I will follow you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Even like sometime for me, like I have commitment with the other group for japa, but because this is 2 days, so I just come here and I balance it out that way.
Yeah, these are not difficult things to sort out.
Thank you. Hare
Okay.
Krishna.
Anybody else got anything they want to contribute?
I have only question, Guruji.
Oh, right. Yes. Thank you.
Guruji, my question is this: at the stage of the neophyte devotee, the instruction for him that he should avoid the association of the opposite sex. He should try to, at least at some extent, he should try to follow the rule and regulation. So make his purity. And when suppose he is coming on the advanced level, at that time he has to go for the some other service like preaching. In the preaching, we have to deal with everybody, male, female, everybody. And I see that sannyasi or a mature devotee, he deal on the transcendental platform. He is able to deal with everybody with the proper consciousness. But as we are gradually coming on, trying to coming on the stage of advancement, how we develop the consciousness in this extent also, that when we are dealing with the opposite sex, we should not have the any kind of wrong consciousness. Our consciousness should be with this mode that we are serving them, we are assisting them, and even we protect ourselves. So how we develop this consciousness, and how the advanced devotee maintain this consciousness.
And what's that consciousness?
Means suppose we are dealing with the Matajis, and they and we are coming for the preaching activity, but our understanding should be we should serve them. They are the soul, but from the long time, from the so many lives, and even in this life also, before the coming Krishna consciousness, our consciousness is not so pure. So for protecting that, we save ourselves, avoid that. But it is not the solution. Solution is that yukta vairagya muchyate. But
Yeah.
how to come on this level of yukta vairagya muchyate?
Yeah. How to maintain a transcendental Shastra Chakshush point of view, as opposed to looking at the external. Well, it's got a lot to do with sadhana, especially chanting Hare Krishna, so that when we're chanting, we're meditating on the Maha Mantra, and we are able to have a direct perception of our spiritual at least, I'm not the body. That's the basis. And so one of the things that chanting Hare Krishna does is it elevates us to, if we're just purely hearing the Maha Mantra and not paying attention to the chatter of the mind, we're able to come to a perception of our spiritual identity, at least that we're not the body. That's the start, right? We may not be at the point of, realizing our Siddha Deha, but at least some understanding, and from that understanding of we're not the body, that I'm a spiritual entity, spiritual being, we get a higher taste. And that higher taste then absorbs us in that meditation on our spiritual identity. And even if we're interacting with elements of the material world, then we're able to maintain that transcendental perspective, or that spiritual perspective, that spiritual viewpoint. But material energy is very strong. Maya has many tricks to try to deflect us or to distract us. And so we have to practice. It's and we know for the attraction to sense enjoyment is powerful, it's strong, and it's a habit that's been cultivated for many, many lifetimes. And so we need to be careful. We need to make sure that our sadhana is good, that our spiritual perspective is kept intact. And if we find ourselves in a situation where that is weakened, we may have to retreat a little while, to regroup and, rest and control our mind and senses. And that comes from chanting Hare Krishna, from studying Prabhupada's books, associated with the devotees through kirtan, all of the things we do in our sadhana. So usually that perspective, that spiritual vision, spiritual perspective is maintained by good sadhana practice, good association, and a regulated lifestyle. Does that make sense?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji.
There are no secrets. There's no magic powder or magic wand that you can just sprinkle on people or wave over people, and then all of a sudden, it's just good sadhana. Yeah. And good association and regulation and detachment too. Detachment is important in that, if we're when we're in situations where there may be some distraction, we keep our mind focused on what we should be doing, not distracted. And Krishna mentions that in the Bhagavad Gita, wherever the mind wanders, bring it back. Bhagavad Gita is full of instruction. Well, not specifically on this point, but there are many instructions, basic instructions on the Bhagavad Gita that teach us how to control the mind and the senses. And Prabhupada makes the point in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that a yogi or a devotee is like the tortoise. And so, when there's danger, the tortoise pulls his legs and head in. And so similarly also the devotee, like a yogi, where there's opportunities for sense gratification or invitations for sense gratification, then he withdraws the mind and the senses. And then when there's opportunity to engage the mind and the senses in Krishna's service, then they're engaged and they're active. But when there's danger, or this option of engagement in sense growth, the devotee pulls the mind and the senses inwardly. That's the example that Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita, right?
But here, according to this example, there is one example also of the Srila Haridas Thakur. When the Chintamani came to Haridas Thakur, he was there and he was constantly chanting, but he need not to just take in his senses inside, but even he controlled, because of he was engaged in the chanting of the Lord. I think,
yeah, and Haridas Thakur wasn't meditating on the prostitute while he was chanting Hare Krishna, right?
Right.
But if we're a lesser devotee than Haridas Thakur, of which we probably are most of the time, then we'd need to be very careful in that situation, and perhaps not even, Haridas Thakur was able to do that. Realistically, we might not be, and so therefore we'd probably leave that place, right?
Suppose we have the service there, how to maintain? That is why I'm asking. We are having the service.
Yeah. But see, the thing is, if the service puts you into a predicament or into a precarious, dangerous situation, then we have to extract ourselves from that, right?
Right.
Yeah. Not that we have to be in a difficult and dangerous situation all the time. Like I said, in emergencies we might do something different, but in the course of ordinary affairs, we stick to our regular program. And it's a fact, when you're out on book distribution, Sankirtan, whatever, we may come into, we find ourselves in all sorts of circumstances and situations, but we need to still be careful about keeping the mind and senses under control.
But we cannot escape from the situation. One day we have to come this platform. That we have to be free from this.
Keep good sadhana. Become self-realized, in other words. Yeah.
And prayer will also help, Prabhuji, in this case.
What's that?
Prayer will also help.
Yes, of course. Krishna, help me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hare Krishna. Okay, I think it's nearly 1:30 for me in the afternoon, and must be close to, 9 o'clock for you in India, at least. Yep. 9 o'clock means prasadam time, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, all right.
Thank you, Aniruddha.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I'm happy to
Prabhuji.
be
Dandavat
with you.
pranam.
Hare Krishna. All
Thank you,
glories to Srila
Prabhuji. Hare
Prabhupada.
Krishna.
Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Record.